The dinner reservation was for 8 o'clock. Derek arrived at 7:43, wearing the same charcoal canvas jacket he wore to his daughter's science fair, the same dark jeans he'd had for 4 years, the same clean but unremarkable boots that had walked through job sites and courthouse lobbies and hospital waiting rooms with equal indifference. He sat at the bar of Callaway's, which was the kind of restaurant that didn't post prices on the menu because the people who needed to know the prices already knew they couldn't afford it. He ordered water. He looked at his phone once, then he put it face down on the bar and watched the room. He was not waiting for anyone. He was simply early, which was something he had always been, in every sense of the word. The table behind him filled up slowly. He recognized one voice before he turned around. Celeste, his wife. Her laugh had a particular quality when she was performing for a room, slightly higher than her real laugh, a half-second longer than genuine amusement required. He heard it now, threading through the ambient sound of the restaurant, and he did not turn around. He picked up his water glass. He took a slow sip, and he listened. "He just doesn't have it." That was a man's voice. Low, assured, the kind of voice that had spent years being agreed with. "I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm saying he doesn't understand what this life requires." He never did. Celeste again. No hesitation, no lowering of her voice. "I spent 6 years waiting for him to become something. You know what he does on Saturdays? He goes to the shop, not because he has to, because he wants to." A small ripple of laughter. 3 or 4 people at the table. "A mechanic," someone said. A woman. Amused, not cruel, which was somehow worse. "Celeste, you were married to a mechanic." "He's not even a mechanic anymore. He owns the shop, which apparently is supposed to be impressive." She paused. Another small laugh. "He drives a 12-year-old truck. On purpose." "That's a very specific kind of man," the assured voice said. "The kind who thinks simplicity is a virtue, who mistakes not wanting things for being above wanting things." Exactly. Celeste's voice had that edge of relief that comes when someone finally articulates the thing you've been feeling for years. He never had ambition. He never wanted more than what he already had. Derek set his water glass down very slowly on the bar. The bartender glanced at him. Derek gave him a slight nod. Just a man paying attention to a sports highlight on the screen above the bar. Nothing more. Behind him, the conversation continued. He heard the name of the man with the assured voice. Brennan. He filed it away. He had heard it before, in other contexts, attached to other information. But hearing it here, in this room, connected to this table and that particular laugh, completed something that had been assembling itself quietly for several months. He finished his water. He left a folded bill on the bar. He buttoned his jacket, which was the same jacket it had always been, and he walked out of Callaway's at 7:59, 1 minute before his wife's reservation time, into the cool of the evening, to his 12-year-old truck, which started on the first turn of the key, the way it always did. He sat in the parking lot for a moment. He did not feel rage. He didn't feel grief. He felt the particular clarity that comes when the last piece of information you needed arrives in a form so clean and so complete that no further analysis is required. He picked up his phone and sent a single text to a contact listed only as R. Run the full Hargrove position tonight. All of it. Then he put the truck in drive and went home. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy powerful, emotional stories filled with betrayal, secrets, and unforgettable revenge, don't forget to subscribe to Plight Stories, because this story, it only gets crazier from here. The house was quiet when he got back. It was always quiet now, in the particular way a house becomes quiet when a marriage has stopped making noise. Not silent, The refrigerator hum, the clock in the hallway, the occasional settling of the foundation, but quiet in the human sense. No movement upstairs, no closet doors, no water running. Celeste was still at dinner, which meant Derek had the house to himself, which was the same as any other evening in the last 2 years. He went to the kitchen. He made tea. He sat at the counter, the same counter where he had sat 6 years ago when he first brought Celeste home to this house, before it was renovated, before the neighborhood changed, before the zip code became something people mentioned at parties. He wrapped both hands around the mug and thought about what he'd just heard, not with anger, but with the particular interest of someone reviewing a chess position that has finally revealed itself completely. He had known about Brennan for 4 months. He had not said anything, because saying something would have required explaining things he was not ready to explain. The kind of things you cannot unexplain. The kind of things that, once out in the room, change the composition of everything else in it. So, he had waited. He was good at waiting. It was possibly his most developed skill, though it never appeared on any document anyone had ever asked him to produce. Let me take you back. 7 years. Because this story does not begin in that restaurant. It begins the way most important stories begin. Quietly, and in a place no one would think to look. Derek Callum was 31 years old when he met Celeste at a fundraiser for a youth automotive program he sponsored. He did not announce that he sponsored it. His name was not on the program. He was there as a volunteer mechanic, teaching a room of teenagers how to change brake pads, wearing a gray t-shirt with a grease mark on the left sleeve. Celeste was there with a girlfriend who worked in nonprofit development, and she walked into the garage bay expecting to find someone important to network with. What she found was Derek, crouching next to a '98 Civic with a teenager, both of them arguing cheerfully about whether you needed to compress the caliper piston before or after removing the old pads. She thought he was an employee. He thought she was the most precise person he'd ever seen walk into a garage. The way she moved through the space without touching anything, cataloging everything with her eyes, the slight tilt of her head when something interested her. They talked for 40 minutes beside a tool chest. She asked what he did. He said he had a shop. She asked what kind. He said automotive. She nodded in the way people nod when they've already decided what category something belongs in and are just waiting for confirmation. He did not correct her categorization. He was curious in those early weeks whether it would matter, whether the category would hold up against the actual person, or whether the category would become more important than what was inside it. He should have tested that sooner. He knows that now. He knew it then, in some quiet part of himself, that he chose not to consult, because he was 31, and she was exceptional, and the garage had smelled like clean motor oil and possibility that evening. And some decisions are made before you fully finish deciding them. They got married in year 2, a small ceremony. His best man was a man named Roy, who had worked with him since the beginning, a soft-spoken accountant who dressed like a graduate student and handled numbers the way Derek handled engines, with total precision and no performance. Celeste's side of the aisle was larger. Her family had opinions about the venue. Her mother made a comment about the truck, the 12-year-old truck, on the day of the ceremony, and Celeste laughed it off in the way she had, back then, of laughing things off, genuinely, without calculation. That laugh changed over the years. He noticed the change the way you notice a change in an engine sound, not in a single moment, but across a series of moments, until one day you realize the sound has been different for a long time, and you don't know exactly when it shifted. Now, the thing about Derek Callum that no one at Calloway's restaurant knew, and that Celeste had never been curious enough to find out, and that Brennan, with his assured voice and his expensive watch and his private equity firm that had been built on ground he did not fully understand, had most certainly not investigated, was this. Derek did not own a shop. he owned 47 shops. 47 automotive service centers across 9 states, operating under 4 different brand names, none of which were connected to Derek's legal name in any document that a casual search would surface. The holding company was registered in Delaware, managed through a trust, administered by Roy, who still dressed like a graduate student and answered his phone on the second ring. Beyond the shops, Derek held equity positions, some majority, some minority, in 16 companies across logistics, commercial real estate infrastructure, and one particularly quiet investment in a financial technology platform that, in the 4 years since his initial position, had grown to become one of the 3 dominant B2B payment processors for mid-market commercial transactions in North America. The platform was called Hargrove Financial Systems. Brennan's firm, Brennan Capital Partners, had spent the last 18 months negotiating an acquisition of Hargrove Financial Systems. It was the largest deal Brennan had ever attempted. 12 seats, 2 attorneys, 4 institutional investors, a private dining room at a restaurant that Brennan himself had chosen because it had a particular kind of weight, the kind of room that makes the people sitting in it feel as though the deal is already real. Derek had purchased his initial stake in Hargrove 4 years ago, quietly, through a series of transactions that Roy had structured with the kind of care that produces no visible trail. The position had grown. He had added to it twice. He now held, through the trust, 41% of Hargrove's total equity. Brennan's acquisition required the agreement of shareholders holding a combined 60% of equity. Without Derek's 41%, the deal could not close. Brennan did not know this. He did not know it because he had looked at the cap table summary his attorneys provided and seen a Delaware holding company listed without a natural person attached to it and had asked no further questions. He was the kind of man who stopped researching when the research confirmed what he already expected. He expected the Hargrove deal to close because he had decided it would close, and decisions, in his experience, had a way of becoming facts when you were the kind of man who made them with enough force. Derek had never attended a Hargrove board meeting. He had never needed to. He had simply waited and watched and let the position grow and thought occasionally about the nature of ground, how some men build on it without knowing who owns it, and how the ones who understand the ground are rarely the ones in the loudest shoes. The year the marriage began to shift in its audible way was the year Celeste was promoted to senior director at a brand consulting firm. The promotion was real and earned. She was very good at what she did, which was identifying the gap between what a thing was and what it could be perceived as, and engineering the crossing. The irony of this was not lost on Derek, in retrospect. Her client roster expanded. Her social calendar expanded. The events she attended began to have a different character. Not charity functions and networking dinners, but launch parties and gallery openings and investment firm celebrations. She started coming home with different names in her stories. The names got louder over time, more certain of themselves. Brennan appeared in her stories in month 4. She mentioned him the way she mentioned other clients at first, professionally, with a note of respect for his operational intelligence. Then the register shifted. Slowly, the way the laugh had shifted. By month 7, Brennan was no longer described as a client. He was described as someone who understood how the world actually worked. Derek listened to all of this with the same quality of attention he brought to an onion with an undiagnosed problem. Quiet, specific, not yet ready to name what he was hearing, but cataloging every symptom. He asked her once, in the kitchen, on a Sunday morning, whether she was happy. She said she was fine. He said that wasn't what he asked. She looked at him for a moment, a specific, assessing look that he had not seen before, as though she were running him through a formula she'd recently learned and producing a result. And then she said that she had been thinking about what she wanted the next 10 years to look like. He said he'd like to hear that. She said she wasn't sure he would. And then she took her coffee and went upstairs. He sat at the counter for a long time after that. He was not waiting for her to come back down. He was sitting with the fact that the question he'd asked had been less about her happiness and more about whether she was still curious about his. And the answer, he understood, was no. She had stopped being curious about his inner life somewhere in the last 18 months. At roughly the same point, she had started measuring the gap between who he appeared to be and who she had decided she needed beside her. She was not a villain. That was the thing he had to keep precise. She was a person who had made a specific kind of error. The error of believing that what a life looks like from the outside is the same thing as what the life is worth from the inside. She had spent her career engineering perception, and she had finally applied that framework to her marriage, and she had found her husband lacking. She was wrong, but she was not wrong in a theatrical way. She was wrong in the quiet, ordinary way that intelligent people are sometimes wrong about the things that matter most, not through carelessness, but through the application of an expertise in exactly the wrong place. The morning after Calloway's, Derek woke at 5:30. He made coffee. He texted Roy. Full disclosure package ready by Friday. Roy responded within 4 minutes. Already building it. You good? Derek typed back. Yeah. Then he put his phone in his pocket, drove to the shop, one of them, the original one on Fairview, which he had kept exactly as it was because he liked it there, and because it was his, and spent the morning working on a '72 Chevelle that a customer had been bringing in for 3 years. The customer's name was Dale. Dale was 78 and retired, and came in twice a month, not because anything was wrong with the Chevelle, but because he liked talking. Derek liked talking to Dale. He spent 4 hours on the Chevelle. He ate lunch at the workbench, a sandwich he'd made himself, wrapped in foil. He answered 11 emails on his phone. 3 of them were from Roy, 2 were from attorneys. One was from the Hargrove board chair, who had sent a brief and curious note inquiring whether the trust intended to participate in the upcoming shareholder consultation regarding the Brennan Capital acquisition proposal. Derek typed back 4 words, "Not at this time." He put his phone back in his pocket and finished his sandwich. It happened on a Thursday. Celeste had mentioned the dinner 2 weeks earlier in the way she mentioned things now, not as a communication, but as a notification. There was a function at the Meridian Club. Brennan was being recognized by a commercial real estate association. She would be attending as part of her firm's client relationship protocol. Derek said that sounded fine. She did not invite him. He did not ask to come. This was the rhythm of the last several months, a series of parallel tracks that had stopped intersecting. On Thursday evening, Derek drove to the Meridian Club, not because Celeste had asked him, because Roy had told him 2 days earlier that Brennan would be using the occasion to circulate the preliminary Hargrove acquisition terms to his investor group, and that the documents his attorneys had prepared contained an error, a specifically consequential error in the cap table representation that would, if left uncorrected, constitute a material misrepresentation to institutional investors. Roy had wanted to send a formal notice through the trust's legal counsel. Derek said he'd handle it in person. Roy said, "Are you sure?" Derek said, "I'm sure." "All right, I'll have the disclosure package ready to file first thing tomorrow." Good. He wore the charcoal canvas jacket, the same one. The Meridian Club on a Thursday evening was a specific kind of beautiful, the kind that costs money to maintain and communicates that cost in the particular sheen of every surface, the weight of the cutlery, the temperature of the room, which was always just slightly cool, as if warmth were too casual an affect for the space. Derek arrived at the bar. He ordered water. He watched the room. The event was in the private dining room at the back. Calloway's was the restaurant inside the club. The dining room was a separate enclosed space with glass panels that made the occupants visible to the bar, which was something Brennan had apparently not thought through fully. Derek could see the table clearly. 12 seats. The 2 attorneys he recognized from filings he'd reviewed. The 4 institutional investors, 2 faces he knew, 2 he didn't. Brennan at the head, in a dark suit that fit extremely well, with the posture of a man who had rehearsed this room in his mind many times. And Celeste. She was not at the main table. She was at a small two-top near the glass, with another woman from her firm, in the capacity of professional support. Present, visible, adjacent to the success she had decided to align herself with. She was laughing. The real laugh, this time. Derek recognized it. It cost him something, in a location he didn't look at directly. He turned back to the bar. A man settled onto the stool next to him. Mid-40s, jacket that had been expensive 4 years ago, the look of someone who attended events like this regularly enough to be comfortable, but not regularly enough to be bored. He glanced at Derek. His gaze moved across Derek's jacket, his hands, mechanic's hands, with the particular texture of hands that have worked, and arrived at a conclusion that Derek watched him arrive at in real time. "Here for the Callaway's event?" the man asked. "Not exactly," Derek said. "You a member here?" "No." The man nodded, in the way people nod when they've confirmed a hypothesis. He turned back to his drink. Derek did not mind. He had spent his entire adult life watching people arrive at incorrect conclusions about him, and he had understood, somewhere around year 3 of building what he'd built, that the conclusions were not the problem. The conclusions were, in fact, extremely useful. They created a consistent ambient expectation that was very easy to operate beneath. At 8:47, the private dining room door opened. Brennan's lead attorney stepped out, walked to the bar, ordered water, and checked his phone with a concentrated frown that Derek recognized as the frown of a man who has just received a notification that disrupts something. Derek stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the private dining room. The door was not locked. He opened it. 12 faces turned toward him. Brennan's was among them. So was Celeste's from her adjacent table, visible through the glass partition, who looked up at the sound of the door and went very still. Brennan looked at Derek the way a man looks at something that has arrived in the wrong place. Not hostile. Confused. In the precise, offended way of a person whose mental model of a room has been disrupted by an element that doesn't belong in it. "Can I help you?" Brennan said. Derek looked at the table. He located the cap table document. It was on the table in front of the lead investor on Brennan's left. He pointed to it. "You have an error in your equity representation," Derek said. "Column 4, line 18. The Callum Trust is listed at 9%. Current position is 41%. Silence. Brennan looked at his attorney, who had followed Derek in from the bar and was now standing just inside the door with an expression that had crossed from professional into something more personal. "I'm sorry," Brennan said. "Who are you?" Derek looked at him. "Derek Callum," he said. "I'm the Callum Trust." The room held that sentence for a moment. The lead investor, a woman named Patricia, who ran a Chicago-based institutional fund and had a reputation for reading rooms faster than anyone Derek had ever encountered, looked down at the cap table. Then she looked up at Derek. Then she looked at Brennan. "Nathan," she said quietly, "at 41%, this deal cannot close without his vote." Brennan did not respond immediately. He was performing a recalculation that his face could not entirely conceal, a rapid, visible adjustment of everything he thought he understood about the room he had spent 6 months engineering. "You should have received a disclosure notice from my counsel," Derek said. "They filed it this morning. I wanted to make sure the error was corrected before anything was signed." He looked at the table one more time. He looked at Brennan. "I'm not blocking the deal," Derek said. "I'm correcting the record." Whether the deal proceeds is a separate conversation, and one I'm happy to have at the appropriate time, through the appropriate channels. He nodded once. He turned to leave. "Wait!" Celeste's voice from behind the glass. Muffled but audible. She had stood up. She was pressing her hand flat against the partition. He stopped.
He didn't turn around immediately. "Derek." Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her in a very long time. Not performing, just present. He turned. She was looking at him through the glass.
Behind her, the woman from her firm was watching with the careful stillness of someone who has just understood that they are witnessing something they will be thinking about for years. Celeste's eyes moved across his jacket, his hands, his face, and then, slowly, through the glass, in the quiet of that particular room, something shifted in her expression. Not shock, not grief. Something more specific and more devastating. The expression of someone who has spent years applying the wrong formula to a problem and has just, in real time, understood the nature of the error. She did not say anything else. Derek held her gaze for one moment. Just one. And then he said, quietly, through the glass, the thing he had been carrying for a very long time. "Because I wanted to know if you could see me without the receipts, Celeste. And I got my answer." He turned. He walked through the private dining room, past the 12 seats and the attorneys and the investors and Brennan's expensive, perfectly fitted suit. He opened the door. He walked through the bar, past the man who had decided he didn't belong there, past the bartender who'd poured him water, out into the evening air. His truck was in the lot. It started on the first turn of the key. He drove home. He did not attend the rest of the meeting. He did not need to. Roy called at 10:17 that evening. "Patricia O'Sea's office reached out," Roy said. "I know," Derek said. "They want a direct conversation about the position. Schedule it for Tuesday. The Brennan deal is effectively on ice. His attorney called twice." "I know. You want me to respond?" "Not yet." Roy was quiet for a moment. "You good?" Derek was in the kitchen. The same counter, the tea mug, the refrigerator hum, the clock in the hallway. The house making its ordinary sounds. "Yeah," he said. "I'm good." After he hung up, he sat for a long time at the counter. He thought about the fundraiser 7 years ago, the garage bay, the grease mark on his t-shirt, the way she'd tilted her head when something interested her. He thought about how genuine that curiosity had been once, how specific, how it had felt in those early years, like the thing he'd been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. Someone who paid attention to what was actually in front of her, not just to what it was supposed to represent. He thought about when that had changed, not with anger. With the particular grief of understanding something clearly, completely, and too late to use the understanding. He stayed at the counter until the tea went cold. The Brennan Capital acquisition of Hargrove Financial Systems did not close. It did not close because Patricia O'Sea's fund withdrew its commitment 8 days after the Meridian Club dinner, citing due diligence concerns that had emerged regarding the accuracy of the cap table representation in the pre-closing documents. Without her fund's commitment, a second institutional investor withdrew. Without the second investor, the financing package could not be assembled. Without the financing package, the acquisition could not proceed. Brennan's attorney spent 3 weeks trying to restructure the deal. They reached out to Derek's counsel 4 times. Derek's counsel responded to each inquiry with the same polite, unhurried language. The trust had no current intention to block or facilitate any transaction. The trust's position would be evaluated in the normal course of portfolio review. In the 11th week, Brennan's firm withdrew the acquisition offer entirely. The announcement was a single paragraph in a trade publication. The paragraph used the phrase strategic reconsideration of timing. It was the kind of language that people in the industry understood to mean something had gone wrong that couldn't be described without attribution. Derek read the paragraph on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the workbench in the Fairview shop, eating a sandwich he'd made himself. He set his phone face down and went back to the engine. The divorce was handled by attorneys. Celeste retained a firm that was well regarded for aggressive matrimonial work. Her attorneys filed a motion to obtain financial disclosure across all of Derek's holdings. The discovery process took several months because the holdings were extensive and because Roy had structured everything with a precision that produced complete clarity once examined fully. And the complete clarity was exactly as surprising as Celeste's attorneys had feared it might be. The number, when it arrived in full, was the kind of number that does not require context or explanation. It simply sits in the room. Celeste's lead attorney asked at one point why the trust structure had been designed to produce so little surface visibility. Derek's attorney relayed the question. Derek thought about it for a moment and then sent back 4 words. He prefers things quiet. The settlement was negotiated over 8 weeks. Derek did not attempt to hide assets or contest numbers that were legitimate. He was specific about what he would give and clear about what he would not. His attorney described him, after their first in-person meeting, as the most composed client he had worked with in 22 years of matrimonial law. Composed was the word people used when they couldn't quite locate the right word. The right word was something closer to finished, not in the sense of done, but in the sense of a piece of work that has reached its conclusion and needs nothing more added to it. 6 months after the Meridian Club, Derek drove to his daughter Maya's school play. She was playing a supporting character in a production of a story about a lighthouse keeper, and she had 3 lines, and she delivered all 3 with a seriousness and a stillness that made several parents in the audience exchange glances. He watched her from the 4th row, in the charcoal canvas jacket, with his phone off and his hands in his lap, and his complete attention on the stage. Afterward, in the parking lot, she put her hand in his. She was 9 years old and had the particular quality of observation that runs in families, though neither of them had ever discussed it. "Daddy," she said, "how come you always look the same at everything?" He looked down at her. "What do you mean?" "Like at the school play, and at the shop, and at dinner. You look the same." He thought about this. "I think," he said carefully, "because the thing I'm paying attention to doesn't change based on where I am." She considered this with the expression she got when she was processing something she wasn't sure she fully understood, but was filing away for later. "Okay," she said. They walked to the truck. It started on the first turn of the key. He drove her home through the evening, and they talked about the lighthouse keeper, and about whether lighthouses were still used, and about the particular way light behaves when it's trying to be seen from very far away. And neither of them said anything else that was important, because nothing else needed to be said. Brennan Capital Partners relocated to a smaller office in the spring. The trade press noted the move in a brief item that attributed it to a portfolio restructuring. The Hargrove acquisition collapse had produced a downstream effect that Brennan had not modeled. 2 of his existing fund investors had quietly reduced their exposure, citing concerns about diligence process. The reduction was not dramatic enough to be a crisis, but it was specific enough to be permanent. The kind of permanent that doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up in the available square footage and the number of associates at the holiday party. Brennan was still well-credentialed, still well-connected, still capable of producing the particular quality of assured conversation that rooms like Callaway's rewarded. But the architecture beneath him had been revealed, in that dining room, to be thinner than anyone had known, including him. And once that kind of information is in a room, it does not leave. It becomes part of the ambient understanding of who someone is and what their confidence is actually secured against. He had built on ground without checking who owned it. He had not been the only one. Celeste moved into a smaller apartment in March. Not dramatically smaller, not punishingly smaller, just the specific,
ordinary smaller of a life that has been recalibrated by the discovery that the proximity you chose was not the thing it appeared to be from the outside. The social circle adjusted.
This was the nature of the circles she had moved in. They were organized, loosely, but consistently, around the gravity of certain individuals. And when the gravity shifts, the orbit shifts with it. Some of the people she had spent the previous 3 years cultivating remained in her life. Most did not through hostility, through the quiet arithmetic of time and access and shared interest, which reorganized itself, as it always does, around what is actually present rather than what was once adjacent. She was not ruined. She was not suffering in any dramatic sense. She was simply living the specific, unglamorous aftermath of a miscalculation, the part that never appears in the version of the story you tell yourself while you're making the decision, the part that is just Tuesday, just Wednesday, just the ordinary texture of a consequence that was completely predictable and that somehow you predicted incorrectly. She thought about him sometimes, about the thing he'd said through the glass. She had turned it over enough times that it had gone smooth, the way objects go smooth from handling. Because I wanted to know if you could see me without the receipts. She had spent 6 years seeing his jacket, his truck, his shop, his quietness, and constructing from those things a story about limitation. She had been wrong in the most precise way a person can be wrong. She had gathered real evidence and drawn an incorrect conclusion, not through carelessness, through an expertise she had applied in exactly the wrong place. She did not hate him. She did not have the particular energy for it that grief sometimes produces. What she had was something cooler and more permanent, a clear, unobstructed view of the specific nature of her error, which she was going to be living with for a long time. Derek Callum was at the shop on a Friday morning in April, working on a '65 Mustang that a new customer had brought in with a cracked block. It was a serious problem, the cracked block. The kind of problem that some people chose not to fix because the cost of fixing it exceeded, in their estimation, the value of what was being repaired. Derek had a different view of this. He had always had a different view of this. He was under the car when his phone rang. It was Roy. "Patricia's office confirmed for Tuesday," Roy said. "Good. They're bringing 2 people. They want to talk about the Hargrove position and a new opportunity they're developing. Infrastructure play. They want to know if you'd have any interest in a co-investment position." "I'll take the meeting," Derek said. "You want me there?" "Yeah, come in the truck." Roy laughed. "The 12-year-old truck?" "The 12-year-old truck." "All right," Roy said. Derek hung up. He slid back under the Mustang. The cracked block had a specific problem in a specific location, and it required a specific solution, which he had already identified. It would take time to fix correctly. Most things that were worth fixing did. He worked in the quiet of the shop, the sound of tools, of metal, of the radio playing low in the background, with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. Complete, unhurried, directed at what was actually there. He was the same man he had always been. That had always been the thing. That had always precisely been the thing. The truck had 214,000 miles on it. Derek had no plans to replace it. Ask yourself this. Not whether he should have told her. Not whether she deserved what came. Ask yourself the question underneath both of those questions. Why is it that we only start looking for what's actually there after someone else tells us it's worth looking for? What does that say about what we're actually measuring when we say we see someone?